Welcome to the Remembering Podcast. I am one of your two hosts, OnenO.
And I'm KK.
Today, we are coming live from Nashville, Tennessee, per usual. And we thought that we would just have a little more of an impromptu conversation about the idea of what is spiritual ascension and why does it matter? How have we undergone certain experiences in our lives that we would attribute to a spiritual ascension? And, what does it mean to be spiritually awake? And all of these fun subjects we were just riffing on before we started recording today. So we thought, let's just turn it into the podcast.
Let's turn this on.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So how do you connect with that, KK?
Well, I think I'm going to reflect back a little bit. So as you and I both have been raised with the Christian faith very present in our life, I, from a young girl, have always thought my spirit man was an extremely important and integral part of my beingness. Because
what do you mean by spiritual man? You said my spirit man.
My spirit man, yeah. So when my flesh dies, I have this eternal beingness within me that's going to live on. And so that can be viewed as a light body or something that is eternal that will continue on into other planes of existence. So just as Christ came here and he embodied man and he died and he went into the underworld and then he ascended, Christ, I believe, set the model for us to be able to obtain this ascension, not in the same way, because I'm not God. I'm not, I think that there's a distinction for me there that I'm not God, I'm not Christ, I'm not Holy Spirit, I'm not the Trinity. But I think that there is a part within me as somebody that has been God created in the image of God, where I can ascend into something that is far greater than what I am right now.
Sure.
So investing into my spirit man is as equally as important as making sure my desires of my flesh are satisfied.
Yeah. So when you say spirit man, you're talking like your soul.
My soul,
your
yeah.
eternal spirit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Let's call it my spirit man.
Your spirit man.
He's a man.
I've never heard that.
He's a cool man. And
yeah. So then how what do you think a spiritual ascension is? Like, how does it apply to what you've experienced in your journey? What would you say spiritual ascension is in the sense of what you've experienced?
I have a much different viewpoint today of it, but I've always had this draw to it.
Yeah.
I don't know where the draw came from when I was like a teenager or a young adult. But when I was a young adult, I learned about the Buddha light body and that the Buddha rainbow body. That fascinated me, that there's these bodhisattvas and these monks that would commit themselves to prayer and fasting and a monastic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they would literally turn themselves into
light,
beings of light.
Yeah.
And as we know, light is a spectrum here on Earth. So that fascinated me. Like,
it's almost like it's another dimension.
Yeah.
Of
like,
being.
what did they do? And how did they do that? And there's recordings and there's people that have witnessed this and they talk about it. And that's, in the West, we don't really talk about stuff like that. Like, hey, did you hear about that monk that turned into a light body?
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
But these are the things that interested me, 10, 15
William
years
Henry
ago.
talks a lot about
he
this.
He did. And that's how, my journey into meeting him was like, oh, there's somebody that teaches about this? What's this about?
Yeah. There's some interesting connections too for the Christian listeners out there of, Jacob and the Coat of Many Colors. Jacob, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I've heard William Henry break that down and talk about how that coat of many colors is symbolic for the light body and is basically just putting on your light body.
Right.
And I find that fascinating.
And then the transfiguration of Christ on the mountain, Mount Sinai. So this was a fascinating discovery for me. There's this iconic picture of, there was 3 of his disciples that he invited up onto the top of the mountain when he transfigured into a being of light. And because his light was so bright, they had to shield their eyes because they could not look at him. But after Christ ascended from the underground after his death on the cross, he defeated death. He freed those that were captured or captive in the underworld, Hades, whatever you want to call it. Then he ascended and he was transfigured into a being of light, but now they could look at him.
Yeah, they could see him.
So why could they see him then, but they couldn't see him before? And I think that has a deep, deep contemplative factor into what do we have to do to be able to see Christ in that light?
Yeah, and I also find it interesting that in the part of the story where Jesus raises from the dead, in the Easter story, there's so many people that see him and don't know it's him. And then it says in the Bible that Christ finally reveals himself.
Yeah, he's
so it's
transfigured.
Almost like, yeah, so it's like he is there present in front of them and they can't perceive him. And then he reveals himself to them and then they perceive him.
Yep.
I've always found that fascinating
That
too.
is super fascinating. Yeah, there's even a story. I didn't realize this until this past year, but I could be butchering this. But did you know how many times Jesus reveals himself after he ascended biblically?
I don't think I know a number, no.
It's like 40 times.
Really?
40 times. And one, he revealed himself to a crowd of 300 people.
Really?
Yeah, it's in the freaking Bible.
That's cool.
These are things I did not learn about in Sunday school. So now as an adult, I'm like deep diving into some of these stories and reteaching myself with this new lens of like, what's important to me, what's not important to me.
Right.
My flesh is not eternal. This world is a wonderful learning ground. I always call it Earth School because I'm learning so many lessons here. But what is truly important is my spiritual walk.
Yeah, totally. Another verse you're reminding me of, which I know we've talked about before, is when Christ says, when your eye be single, you will see your body as light. And I think that's fascinating to connect the idea of like a third eye chakra, being this central position through which our awakening happens. And I've always just found that fascinating that Christ talks about you will see your body as light when your eye is single. And because we know we look through two eyes. So what is this symbolism and what is that talking about?
And that's something we were kind of riffing on before we went and started recording. So I've been doing a little... Okay, so hold on. I want to go back. How many times did Jesus appear after his resurrection? I wanted to make sure I was fact-checking that.
Yes, please.
So... he revealed himself over 40 days.
Okay.
So not 40 times.
Gotcha.
See, I was close.
Yeah, you got the 40.
This is why we fact check.
Yeah.
40 days after his resurrection. It's speculated he appeared around 10 times. But that story of him appearing to a crowd of 300 blew my mind.
Yeah.
Because this is where the early church assimilated themselves. They were like, oh my gosh, we can't deny that he actually was raised from the dead because we've seen him with our own eyes.
Yeah.
And so very fascinating. We can talk about that another time.
Totally.
So I have a very good girlfriend of mine. We've been friends for like 10 years. And she opened her Kundalini.
What is that? First of all, what does that mean?
Well, so it's known to be in Eastern philosophy or yogic culture. There's a serpent that lays dormant at the base of your spine. And this is...
We're talking like a real serpent?
Yeah, it's a real snake.
Real
it's a boa
snake?
constrictor.
I had no idea.
No, it's a garden water snake.
Yeah, of course.
So in the spiritual... So if we do believe ourselves to have a spirit man within us, and when I say man, I'm being gender neutral here.
Are you though, KK?
So
Right.
my spirit man that is integrated with this body, so 2 in 1 here, physical and spiritual. The spiritual beingness of myself has this wisdom, is what they call it, like this wisdom that lays dormant in the base of your spine. So through breathing exercises and certain yogic postures and disciplines, spiritual disciplines, you can release... It's known that you can release this Kundalini, which travels up through your spinal column.
Yeah.
And it penetrates your pineal gland.
Yeah, which is in the center of your forehead.
Right.
It's considered the third eye chakra.
Yep. And so it takes a lot of discipline and time and extreme wisdom. We do not advocate anybody going out there and just being like, I want to open up my Kundalini.
Yeah, no, it's a whole path, a whole technique. That's what yoga was birthed to even do, is prepare people to open their Kundalini. Because they even have warnings all throughout the yogic lineage that if your Kundalini somehow gets opened before you've been prepared for it, you could have really devastating effects take place in your life.
For example, Yogananda, which is one of my favorite teachers, he would always equate it to you wouldn't just walk into a room and turn the brightest light bulb on in a black space, because then you would literally blind yourself. You wouldn't be able to look at it. But if you were to dim the light over a long period of time and allow your eyes to get adjusted to the light as it got brighter and brighter and brighter, you would then be able to hold that space for that light and know how to operate within that space.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but he said, if you just turn it on, you will break yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You can't do that.
You're making me think of all of these stories in the Bible, too. There's, what's that? It's the transformation of Saul into Paul.
Oh, yeah.
And how that story goes that
it blinded him.
Yeah, he's walking down the street and all of a sudden a blinding light, which then it says inspires fear inside of Saul at the time. Then he undergoes this huge transformation, and this is all symbolism, but it's said that then he has these scales over his eyes and he's blinded by this light. And then his story is he ends up traveling somewhere. He's blind while he's traveling. He ends up going somewhere and somebody, I don't know if it's presented as a healing, but somebody fixes his blindness, and it says that the scales fall from his eyes. And then that's when he's given a new name. So his whole being was transformed by experiencing this light. And that it was terrifying because of how bright and powerful this light is. And again, I'm speaking in symbolism.
Exactly. I kind of take the Paul story. I love Paul. I think his story is just freaking phenomenal and fascinating. And I tend to take it a little bit more literally. I do believe he really had that transformation, and I think we can all have that transformation. He was persecuting and stoning and killing Christians, and then he's a super privileged and educated man in the Jewish community. And then he completely, through this transformation of light, changes his entire perspective and is now defending everything he was against before. The Kundalini or the light ascension process is an extremely sacred and profound transformation of ourselves.
Yes.
And we need to understand how to be, it's sacred. It's got to be handled with respect. And I think that's where I'm coming to you. We in the West are just kind of like, open up Kundalini shops here and there. And I think what's happening is it's losing a lot of respect that it had in the past. And that was, the opening of the Kundalini was reserved for people who were ready for it.
Oh, yeah. Even I know in Egypt, this isn't purely about awakening the Kundalini, but their spiritual ascension process involves literally 20 years of preparation and then another 20 years of preparation before you finally undergo their process, where I learned this information from Drunvalo Melchizedek, and he talks about this whole process, and he says that after those 40 years of preparation, you then undergo the final ascension process where you do this ritual in the pyramids of Giza.
Oh, wow.
And you are basically blasted out into the universe. And it takes 40 years of preparation. Wow. And the reason why, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, so I'll keep it short for now. We'll unpack it more later. But the reason why the preparation is there is as we ascend through these different dimensions of experience, we're here in the 3D, we start awakening into the 4D and then the 5D. But as you the higher up these vibrations you go, it's said that the power of thought manifests faster and faster and faster. So in the 3D, our thoughts usually take a very long time before we see them in the physical. In the 4D, it's much faster, but they say by the time you get to 5D, that the thought that you think is manifested instantly. And so when the Egyptians were preparing their pupils to undergo this spiritual awakening into these higher dimensions, the reason that they took 40 years to prepare the mind or the consciousness is because you're about to be blasted into a reality where whatever is in your mind is going to be made manifest.
Ooh,
and so, of course, we wouldn't want to instantly manifest our worst fears.
Right.
So that's where this
good.
whole training of the mind comes in order to handle that as we undergo that experience.
I love that it's at least 40 years too.
Yeah. Well, there's also major symbolism in the
In
number
40?
40.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know that perfectly in order to be able to explain it, but I've heard it in my past quite a bit. My small remembrance and understanding of it is that 40 in the Hebrew culture is connected to the idea of completeness and being totally complete. So that makes sense then that Christ would spend 40 days revealing himself. And
40 days in the desert fasting.
Yeah. And you
for
have
his
Noah
death.
in the Noah story, and Noah's Ark has 40 days and 40 nights of rain. And so there's this number 40 has a lot of symbolism.
I love that.
But so explain to me how you are coming to this position of now questioning Kundalini.
Yeah. So last year was just buck wild for everybody, right?
Yeah, 2020. Yeah, that shook up a lot.
It shook up a whole lot. So in my world, my spiritual journey took kind of a new path, and that I'm thankful for it. I am always remaining open to different, to learning and to being open to things and questioning myself. So this is just we always on this podcast are like, question what's being told to you, question what you think. Trust me, everyone, we do the same thing to ourselves. So I'm questioning some belief systems that I've held very dear to me. I'm not convinced completely. I'm just kind of like chewing around the idea of it. That's it. And so here we are these are what conversations help us evolve. Hey,
Totally.
I'm thinking about this. What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, I believe it's from Marcus Aurelius, is that it's the sign of an intelligent mind, someone who can hold two opposing ideas without accepting both or either.
Yeah.
And it's not that you stay there indefinitely, but it's that you should never hold on to one belief as if that's the end of everything.
Yeah.
You should always be willing to take in the opposing belief and mentally chew it until you can come to a clear understanding of what you think about it all.
Yeah.
But there's most people, they just believe one thing and it's like, no, everything else is wrong. And sometimes that's not always true.
Yeah. So I'm about to throw a wild one at you.
Yeah, please.
Because I want to come back around to this, but this is also one of those things that have led me into like, well, maybe I need to look at this. I'm just going to look at it and see what I think, because I'm looking at everything else and, just inviting it into my life. Doreen Virtue.
Oh, yeah. I'm only vaguely familiar.
Okay.
I do know who she is, but...
So she was a New Age thought leader for 20, 30 years. She did angel cards, tarot readings, that kind of thing. And she did a radical shift into fundamental Christianity.
She did? Wow.
Probably like 4 years ago.
Oh, so recently.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And I mean, it's extreme. And I don't really like a whole lot of extreme things. So she really rubbed me the wrong way at first when she was like, this is where I'm going. If you're into ascended masters or if you're into anything like that, that's taking you down a wrong path. And I'm like, man, she really closed herself off to a whole lot. Like talk about being closed-minded. And so I didn't even give her a shot. I was just like, you know what? Somebody probably witnessed to her. She felt bad. Something happened. And she went fundamental Christian on me and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I still don't know how I completely feel about Doreen Virtue. She's there. I'm at least looking at her. I'm at least not like, oh, she's bullshit, which tells me, if I'm not holding that opposed view, I'm just I'm chill. It means I'm not opposing somebody and their perspective. Like you do you, I'm going to do me. That's how the world goes round. And this is how we're kind to each other.
Yeah.
So not passing judgment. But anyway, I have a very close girlfriend who accidentally opened her Kundalini, probably about 7-8 years ago. And I remember when it happened, she called me and told me about it. And, I was just like kind of envious. I was like, wow, you did what?
Yeah.
And she goes, I absolutely know this is what happened. It might sound a little woo-woo, but she then had a lot of experiences, like supernatural experiences after this initial Kundalini awakening. And the stories and the experiences and the things she would see and the feelings and the downloads she would receive was just like next level, out of this world.
Yeah.
And at first I thought, wow, this is incredible. Like I meditate a lot, but I just kind of like try to keep my mind from wandering. So
Right, yeah.
this is more of like a discipline of like myself. So anyway, long story short, it's been about 7-8 years now, and she is seeking someone to help her shut it off.
To stop the Kundalini.
To close the Kundalini.
And why?
She's been doing some research, and if you're not ready to open your Kundalini, which she was not seeking, she did not have a guru that was like, or a spiritual teacher. She had a spiritual teacher, but not really like coaching her through this method.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
it happened really suddenly. So it, for her, has opened up this kind of like portal or pathway into a realm that's not serving her. It's created some almost like confusion and fear and doubt within herself, and just really extreme. Like when I said at first she was having these like a crazy wonderful experiences, that has now turned into something that she has no control over or can't manage. And just awful dreams, awful experiences, very open to the spirit realm where she doesn't want to be. And so she's actively working with someone right now who specializes in helping people shut off that portal or that Kundalini, because it's when you awaken that, you're literally have opened up your mind, that crown chakra to different frequencies. And if you're listening to this and you're like, what in the world? You're either tracking or you're not right now. So I'm so sorry. If you have questions, come DM us or, email us. But so she's trying to shut that and bring back her power. Yeah. And I respect the hell out of her, because I didn't even know that was like a thing.
Yeah.
And this isn't a personal experience, but this is a really, really close friend of mine that's going through this. And so over the years, I know she's not making stuff up, because it's been consistent.
Yeah.
This is what I experienced this week, or this is what I experienced last night. And it's just like, wow, what have you opened yourself up to? And if you do believe in a spirit realm, which I do and you do, then we do know that there's a lot happening in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, I find it fascinating that the difference of cultures kind of plays a part here. I've noticed that we in the West, we're just now becoming aware of a lot of Eastern philosophy. It's been on the rise in the U.S. since maybe the 30s, and around the 50s, I think it was really picking up. And then throughout the 70s, 80s, and purely into today, it's booming. And the culture of yoga and becoming aware of these words, but not necessarily the history and the philosophies and all of that. It's becoming extremely popular out here. But we were talking a little bit before when we started recording, we were talking about the idea of, is this evil, this idea that you have a serpent in your spine, that it's going to raise and awaken something called the Kundalini. Well, my understanding of this stuff, of how we end up fearing these things, is that there's a difference in culture going on. So in the West, we've been raised with Christianity as the fundamental religion. And in that religion, also I just want to interject that Joseph Campbell is the one that really enlightened me to what I'm about to be talking about. And Joseph Campbell describes how to the West, the symbolism of the serpent is tied in with very evil connotations. We've used that symbol to represent the devil or the negative aspects of humanity and of life and of the spiritual realm. Whereas in the East, in the yogic world, in the Upanishads world, they've used the symbolism of the serpent much more like we would think of the symbol of the butterfly. So the butterfly we understand as being a symbol of transformation. It starts as a worm or a caterpillar, and then it becomes this flying being. Well, in the East, the serpent represents that because the serpent is constantly shedding its skin. And in fact, if it doesn't shed its skin, it will die. So there's this idea that it always has to transform. It always has to move forward. And then you also have more symbolism in the idea of how it undulates back and forth as it slithers in its usual path. That represents the idea of duality and the kind of fundamental energy of consciousness and of the universe. It has this kind of sine wave form to it. So then I think the conflict occurs when we try to overlay these two mythologies on top of each other. Because now we're trying to understand Eastern philosophy through the lens of Western philosophy. And that, according to Joseph Campbell, is what generates a lot of internal conflict. Because now you have these symbols that are being slightly used differently. So, but within that framework, I don't perceive the pure idea of a Kundalini awakening as being evil. In fact, Neville Goddard talks so much in some of his lectures I've been listening to recently about the Christ story is the awakening of the Kundalini. And that basically Neville describes his awakening journey into Christ consciousness in some very powerful and profound ways. And there's even times where I'm listening to him, and KK, you know how much I love Neville Goddard.
Yes.
There's times I'm listening to it and I'm just like, whoa, like really? I don't even know how to comprehend what he's talking about. And some of the stuff he talks about is that this awakening experience is an undeniable experience in your life. It's not like you could just, maybe it happened. I'm not totally sure. It's like, he says it feels like a fiery serpent rising from the base of your spine. And as it goes into your third eye in your skull, quick tangent on that point, Neville describes how the awakening of Christ occurred in the Bible in a place called Golgotha. And Golgotha, I don't remember which language this is, Aramaic or Hebrew, but it translates to the place of the skull.
Which is where Christ was crucified.
Yes, on Golgotha. And so the death and resurrection of Christ occurs in Golgotha, which is the place of the skull. And so that's where Neville is saying, this is where you will awaken. And he stresses so much that this is not imaginary. He's like, this is the reality. You will one day awaken in the middle of your skull in pure darkness, and you will move forward. You will birth yourself forward out of your skull into light. And that's why Neville breaks down the symbolism of the rebirth, the second birth that Christianity talks about so much. So I just wanted to throw all that out there, and now we can discuss about it. But I think that's one major caveat I'd like to throw out there to the listeners is that sometimes we end up fearing things that aren't really meant to be feared. We fear some of the Eastern philosophy simply because we're looking at it through the lens of Western philosophy. So I think it's important that we become aware of that.
Have you seen that photo? We'll put this up on the Instagram. It's a Manly P. Hall photo. It's the side profile of a man, and out of his head, out of his skull, his brain is a serpent emerging from the top of it. It's really, really cool.
That's Egyptian symbolism.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
I just learned about that too in the last few years, that when you look at the pharaohs and all of these old statues as well as hieroglyphs, when you see a pharaoh who has, think of the typical pharaoh image that you've probably seen where, like, I don't know how to describe it verbally, but there's like a rim that goes around the head. It's like this kind of shroud looking thing that's going around their head. And then they have a serpent coming up out of their forehead. And they use this symbolism to describe an awakened consciousness inside of a human being. Because now you have this serpent-like awareness, which is they symbolize it as being this hyper awareness. Like the serpent is a very vicious and fast animal.
I believe they intentionally keep the tail out. Like they never like incorporate the end of the tail because the tail is supposed to be connected into the spine.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was reading or watching some. Oh, what's his name? He's fascinating. He was an Egyptologist that passed away recently, and he was always on Joe Rogan.
Okay.
But he would take people on tours. Smartest guy I've ever talked or listened to. Well, there's a few smart guys about Egypt, but he was one that I just was like, he has this YouTube series. It never went like mainstream, but just fascinating stuff. And he kind of would throw little tidbits of like Egypt symbolism and artwork and the way things were made. Like he's just like, people don't know this, but this is what this means.
Yeah.
And it's just like, damn, you've got to really like go out there and dig to understand ancient civilizations like that, because we just use it and we're like, oh, that's cool. You know, the Eye of Horus is cool. But it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, because this symbolism of this stuff is so deep and so fascinating.
Is. And it's literally transformed the way cultures and societies that cultures that existed before we have, the way they actually operated was through these symbols. And we are just and so I think that's what I was bringing up with you is like this Kundalini thing. Maybe in the West, we're not giving it enough respect. And we are just kind of throwing it around as like, oh, have you opened your Kundalini?
Right.
Well, I've definitely opened up my Kundalini. And like, oh, you've not opened yours yet? And it's like, whoa, maybe we just need to chill out on the opening of the Kundalini.
Yeah.
Because
it's a really easy thing to say.
Yeah.
But
and I don't think there's been enough research or deep spiritual understanding as to what you're actually doing when you do something like that. We are really dealing with the mysteries of creation when we are opening ourselves up to that, which is a beautiful thing. But I also think it's extremely, I'm so sorry, but if you're like, taking X, MDMA, hitting up the club, and then you're like, I want to open up my Kundalini on Sunday in the basement with ayahuasca in LA.
I totally awakened my Kundalini at EDC festival. Or
exactly.
Like
and it's just like, man, these guys have been living up in the Himalayas for 40 years to open up their Kundalini.
Yeah,
there's
and
a
also,
big difference in what's happening here.
Yes, and the awakening of the Kundalini is not just like, I felt so good at that festival, and I made all these new friends and stuff. Like, none of that is bad. I'm not shit talking that, but that's not the awakening of a Kundalini,
right? Like, we really need to. So I think that's why, it's just been on my heart recently. Like, what are we doing? Like, and I love this stuff. I've been exploring it, and I've been researching it, and I've prayed and prayed and prayed, like, open my Kundalini. I want to open my Kundalini. I haven't had that experience. And I think, according to like some of your research and mine and what we've talked about, like, you would kind of absolutely know if it happened.
I think it'd be very undeniable.
Right.
I mean, there's a story I remember hearing from this guy who has a very amazing YouTube channel called, I think it's called Awaken the Dream. God, I feel so bad. I'd love to give this guy a shout out.
Here, I'll look it up real quick. Keep talking and I'll find him.
Yeah, look up Awaken the Dream.
On YouTube?
On YouTube. Okay. But anyways, what I love about this guy's story is he shares what he calls his Kundalini awakening story. And it's freaking powerful. Like, for him, I think he was driving at the time, and he ended up blasting out of his body. I think he had to pull over because he was starting to feel all kinds of weird. And he ends up blasting out of his body and has this incredible story about this astral projection experience. And then he came back to his body, and then that changed his whole life. And he quit his job, and now he's reformed his life into serving humanity. And
Paul Levy?
I don't know if that's him.
Okay.
I'll see if I can talk and look on my YouTube at the same time. But yeah, his story is so fascinating. And that was one of the first times I was exposed to the idea that this Kundalini thing is pretty undeniably,
Yeah.
it's like, you're not going to like think, oh, I don't know, maybe I have, maybe I haven't. You're going to know. By the way, the YouTube channel is called Awakening Our Truth. And I love...
You misled me.
I totally misled you. Awaken the Dream. It's definitely another channel out there I've paid attention to, but Awakening Our Truth. And what he's done now with his channel is his channel is open as like a community place where all of these other channelers will post. And so it's this very communal YouTube channel. It's not really just run by one person. And I love that. It's turned into a community. So yeah, if you want to look up the channel I'm talking about, just search on YouTube for Awakening Our Truth and you'll find his channel. It's so good.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, point of this conversation, I think, is you and I normalizing. It's okay if you haven't opened your Kundalini and you've been trying for like 3 years and you've been going and dumping all your money at the local Kundalini yoga shop. Like, it's okay. And like, just chill. Like, be present and feel your way through. Obviously, if you're wanting to awaken your Kundalini, you're clearly wanting to ascend or evolve into
like a higher state of
consciousness. Yeah. And like, just lean into that. Be a good human being. Be loving. Be joyful. Extend grace. These are the things that are going to get you into the awakened Kundalini state.
Dude, let's talk about that for a minute. Because I think some people get caught up on what you're talking about. And they're like, I'm going to awaken my Kundalini. And then everything becomes about this process, and like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm on this diet, I've changed this in my life, and that's good and whatever. But then sometimes you look at these same people and you see how they are in the world, and they're like kind of bitter, or they're maybe very judgmental, or they just pass by people that they could help out, but they don't. So it's interesting that they're very fascinated with this idea of Kundalini awakening. But when you look at the principles that all of these spiritual teachers and masters like Jesus and Buddha have given us throughout the years, it's usually way more practical, and it's usually the things we don't actually want to do, which is to help our enemies, to love our enemies, to help the poor and the sick, and like live life from the heart and be compassionate. I think that the reason that is such a wild truth is because it's so basic and yet so hard for us to do as long as we live in our ego center. It's
so hard. It's what Paul, I love this scripture. He always says, for what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do.
Right. That's the way of the human.
That is the way of the human. And, he even calls himself the chief of sinners. Like, it's okay to have a human nature. We are human.
Yeah.
And so how do we practice becoming a better human and edifying, like feeding our spirit man? I'm going to keep calling him, I like saying that.
That's good.
So how do we feed our spirit man and be completely embodied in this human experience? Because they're both insanely important.
Yeah.
So we extend grace to people because we're all just doing the best we can. We extend compassion. Okay, so the Tao teaches 3 things: compassion, patience, and simplicity.
Oh yeah, how difficult is that for most people?
Right?
Yeah.
So in this materialistic world, so for me, I like material things. So how do I practice simplifying my life? And, what I do to simplify my life might look like somebody else might look at that and say, oh, well, she's not simplifying. But this is internal. This is an individual process. So what I'm simplifying today, I might really simplify in like 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
But, just being kind to people and seeing them and like, oh, they're doing the best they can. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea of minimalism and simplifying things, I don't think I should even try to attribute this quote. I think it's Albert Einstein, but talking something about how it's only the sign that somebody fully understands something is when they can explain it to a child.
Oh, yeah.
When you fully comprehend something, you will be able to explain it simply. So complex ideas can actually be simplified the more you understand them, because then you can explain them in a much purer sense.
So can we talk about this?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what you're referencing, but yeah, let's do it.
Just, yeah.
I'm on board.
See, we need like big groups of people like this. Like, you want to come? Where are we going? I don't know. Let's just go.
Let's go.
All right. I feel today, just bringing it back to present day living.
Yeah.
We are living in a society that we are only extending compassion and grace to those that are doing what we want them to do.
Yeah, if they live up to our standards.
And so where everyone's got to question what's happening and their motives and why they're thinking the way they are, I feel that I almost want to almost hit the eject button from not just society in general, but just like my involvement in it, because I feel that if I don't look like this one collective group looks, then I will be outcasted. And then I go to the other collective group and they're like, oh, but you're not doing this. Oh, you're outcasted. So it's like, there's a lot of outcasting happening. And how can we flip that into saying, I'm not going to look at the thing inside of you that's opposite of me, but rather I'm going to find something that we can connect on.
Yes, totally. I think that's a big deal. And there's even a Jesus verse, which, I mean, I think you guys are aware of how my brain works at this point. I'm not a verbatim guy, but I pick up these things. And Jesus says something along the lines of that, if you are genuinely and truly of spirit, of God, this world will not like you. And if the world likes you, you should be aware that that probably means you're not connected to spirit. Because this world it has a massive tendency for judgment and for harshness and selfishness. And therefore they hate those that are of a different vibration, that are living more of a love-based lifestyle. This is actually another thing I posted on my personal Instagram recently, was this idea between hate and fear. And what I was explaining is that I believe as human beings, we are born, first of all, as a spirit, we're born perfect and flawless. That's my fundamental belief. But the human condition defaults to hatred or fear. We default to being afraid of everything that we don't understand. And then some humans undergo this awakening into love consciousness. And then that ratifies their entire personality and center of being, to the point where they live on this higher dimension of always extending compassion and patience and forgiveness. And then the people that are still in the consciousness of fear, they show hatred to those beings who are showing them love. And this is what we've done throughout all of human history. We've killed JFK. We've killed Martin Luther King. We've killed freaking John Lennon. You know, we killed Jesus. We always kill these beings that we're afraid of, and we're afraid of them because they claim that they live in love consciousness, but we don't trust that. And so I see that as this is the natural state of human beings, is to be in a fear-based perspective. And so part of this spiritual ascension is the awakening of what it even means to love. We think that we know what it means to love, but I propose that I think we have to learn what it means to love.
Oh man, we're done. You have to learn it. Like,
Yes.
It is not innate. And so, like, Wayne Dyer always says, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. We have to teach ourselves to look at things with love, with compassionate eyes, because when we're infants, we need to be touched. We need to be fed. We are not capable of taking care of ourselves. So we are completely dependent on an external source to keep us alive.
Yes. 100%.
And sometimes those external forces are not good. It's not a good home life, not loving, not caring. Some are too caring, too loving.
Yeah.
And some are just right. And so we have this human experience is diverse, but we have to take responsibility at some point when we have reached a level of, oh, that doesn't feel good. So when I lied to my best friend in kindergarten when I was 6 years old, what told me that was wrong? So what is that?
It's a conscience. I think that's what we call
comes
it.
into that ego, or that conscience comes into play where we start deciding, I want to lean into that good feeling or I want to lean into that bad feeling.
Well, yeah, and there's the Native American story of the two wolves, and we've also seen the same symbolism played out with the cartoonish idea of you have a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder. I believe why we have perpetuated these myths for so long is because it reveals something so fundamental to the human consciousness, which is that we do have both tendencies within us. And I think it's, I know Jordan Peterson has talked quite a bit about, you will never actually be a good human being until you realize the depth of your own ability to be a horrible human being.
Yep.
So you have to, and you know, Carl Jung talks about the shadow and how we have to actually become aware of our shadow in order to transcend it. So that's why the kind of surface level idea of love and light and all of that, that's why I think people are so put off by it, is because they realize it's not that simple. And there's something false about a person that is living exclusively in this kind of Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses world, and yet they won't look at their own shadow. I think that we have this very natural human ability to sense that in people. It's through that dark work that we find it.
Charming to me when I meet like a little kid that's being a little devilish, like they're being a little bad, and I'm like, oh, look at them exploring, like being rebellious. They're, I don't know. I find it kind of charming because I'm like, oh, they're feeling their way through. They weren't supposed to go in that room, but they went. Oh, it's like that psychological test they did of the children with the candy.
They delayed gratification test.
Yeah, so they stick a bunch of kids or a kid in a room. They say, "Don't eat this piece of candy, and when I come back, I'll give you a candy bar."
Yeah,
and all the kids, they just can't help themselves. They like eat the candy.
Yeah, they found like less than 1/3 of kids would wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's something to say of like, okay, we have to take control individually of that discipline within ourselves. It's not your parents' fault. It's not the way you were made. It's not external influences. All of that is really, really important. But there is a point in your life where you have to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
And that extends to how much compassion am I going to start extending out into the world? You can only give the world as much compassion as you've extended to yourself. So how much internal work are you going to do? That way you can give it out to the world itself. You can't give from an empty cup.
100%. That's why you have to heal yourself first before you can become a healer.
Yeah.
And this is also why one thing I think is dangerous about the current landscape in the West with social media and layering these things together. You now have a spiritual awakening thing going on, and you have the advent of social media, and the fascination with Eastern philosophy is now kind of opened up this floodgate of people being like, I can help you open your Kundalini. I can help you whatever. I can be your guru, and you can pay me a few $1,000s and come to my retreat and you'll be awakened.
Right.
And it's like what's missing from all of this is that sometimes this is a lifelong process, and sometimes this is even multiple lifetimes of a process. I do believe that we are eternal beings, so I don't think that after my body dies, I'm just going to go into a black nothingness. I'm going to be another being, another creation, another form of some sort.
Right.
And so I believe the human experience, our soul lives through multiple lifetimes, and sometimes it takes thousands of lifetimes to awaken, or thousands of years. I don't know how it works out.
Yeah,
but
what's time?
It takes a shitload of time.
How does time even work?
For someone to even get there.
And I think time is a beautiful thing. We use time here on Earth, but I don't know if you've ever like tripped out before, and then you're experiencing something outside of time. Which, that's for another day, another topic. But what I wanted to say next was, if you feed yourself fear, you are going to give fear into the world. So bringing it back to current day, if you are listening to the news every single day,
Oh, yeah.
you are feeding yourself fear. I don't care what you think. You want to be plugged in. You want to know what's happening. Nope, you need to unplug immediately because it is a fear pumping machine into your body. And it is not ever going to produce the results you think it will.
Yeah.
Just because you think you know what the media wants you to know, it's not the truth.
Yeah.
And B, you're being manipulated constantly to stay in a state of fear. And no wonder our world is running around in a panic state of fear and needing to control other people. We've got to like keep control. We've got to like bring in surveillance. We got to bring in this this need to tell you if you're not vaccinated, you can't go into a store, you know?
Right, yeah.
Like there's a lot of changes happening and it's all fear-based.
Yeah, of course. And that's because they know that fear is what opens us up to being controlled. And that's also why I think the spiritual awakening thing is to understand our relationship with fear and to really build an inner discernment of when am I being irrationally fearful and what is healthy fear? I think a healthy fear would be like if you're out there hunting and you're trying to hunt a deer and all of a sudden you get an awareness that there might be a lion somewhere around you. You should probably be a little fearful and like maybe be aware and get out of there. But we treat this information that comes through the TV as lions. And that is oftentimes, I'm just going to guess and say 90% of the time, completely irrational fear.
Right.
And then that shapes our lives and our realities. And I don't believe our body is even physiologically capable of handling that. And so I think that stress turns into physical disease and discomfort and all kinds of stuff.
Which is so beautiful because we can take the fear stimulus and convert it into something that's really powerful within us. We have to know how to control that, though. Andrew Huberman, I was talking last night. We had a big group of people that got together last night, and we had social hour community. And one of the guys and I were talking about the Huberman Lab. He's this neuroscientist that's out at Stanford University, and he studies fear in people. And he specifically studied David Goggins because David...
I don't know who that is.
Oh, you don't know who David Goggins is? Oh, man. Okay, he's this... oh, man. I don't even know how to describe this guy. He is he is one of the most evolved human beings of our time because what he's done is he's taken his trials and tribulations that are of a mass scale. A lot of people can relate to him because they're like, man, I didn't have it that bad, or I've had it that bad and I chose to go this way. He has this book called Can't Hurt Me. And the whole book is about the trials presented from like early adulthood and how he became overweight and he pretty much lost hope. And he tapped into something and he said, I don't want my life to be this way.
Yeah.
And I don't know what he did, but he kept doing it over when he'd get that fear response in his head of like, I can't do this or I'm not good enough. He somehow was able to manipulate it into, fuck that. I'm going to go even harder into it.
To rise above it.
He is like literally like superhuman dude. And he's alive today. And he has this phrase, I love it. He said, be uncommon within uncommon men. So like find uncommon men that like are going to push you to the limits and then be uncommon within those men.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, he takes it next level.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, studying fear, like the stimulus of fear in a guy like this, it's like, oh yeah, let's like get the primo specimen. David Goggins is very open about his fear of sharks and water. And if you listen to his book, I listened to his book, if you read his book or whatever, he talks about this. Like he had to do all these military like testing to pass so we could get into this certain ranking that he really wanted. And that was another challenge of converting that fear response into a superhuman ability. And so this stuff is we've got to just tap into our own power and say, I'm not going to take the fear response and lay down and die and have someone else control me. I'm going to take this fear response and turn it into something in superhuman, because we have that within each and every one of us.
Yeah. I know we've talked about the idea of courage before on the podcast, but I think it fits perfectly with what you're saying, which is in order to be a courageous human, you actually have to be fearful before you can be courageous, because courage is a response to fear. And so it's when you're fearful, you can choose to succumb to the fear, or you can choose to be courageous, which means you're just going to move forward in spite of that fear. And I think that is so beautiful. And that's why we resonate so deeply with stories and humans that are so courageous, is because we see what they had to overcome.
Yeah.
And mostly it's an internal overcoming. We have to get over our fear and our own blocks.
It's like watching the Hobbit movie. And he
Lord
goes
of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings, and he faces the dragon.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, you like feel it inside of you. And then or like Harry Potter with Voldemort, like all of those things. It's like, yeah. That's fictional movies, but
but these are mythologies.
Deep wisdom in
course.
this. So
because they hit us in our archetypal center, and we resonate with those things.
And we should lean into that feeling. Like when something inspires you, like a piece of artwork or, a flower that just bloomed. I've got this like incredible rose bush in my backyard, and it's fragrant and it's big and it's beautiful. And I just am like, I really need to pay attention to this, because there's something inside of me that is really responding to this rose.
Yeah.
And now it's dying. And I thought about clipping it the other day, and I was like, no, I want to watch the process of this thing, like starting to wither away and turn brown and kind of ugly, and the life cycle. And it's, just instead of responding to fear the way external sources want us to, like how do you internally want to respond to fear? Because you will never be proud of yourself, and you will never evolve or ascend, as we coming back to full circle, you will never ascend if you always fall into the fear trap.
Yep. And let somebody else dictate to you the way out of that fear trap. Yeah, I think to wrap up here, one of the last things that was on my mind is to approach this idea, whether it's a Kundalini awakening or a spiritual ascension or some sort of transcendence into the next dimension, approach this stuff with reverence and respect. And because it's from that space of your heart that I think will guide you to the outcome you are actually seeking. And then from that space of your heart, I say, consult God, pray to Spirit, and ask Spirit to be the guiding force of your journey. And the way I do this internally is to, because I grew up so Christian fundamentalist. I didn't adapt all those ideas for myself, but I was in that community. And then when I became older and in my mid-20s, I'm starting to really open my mind up to things that the church used to say, well, that's a sin, that's of the devil, that's going to make you go to hell. I was always praying to God that, God, please guide me as I am exploring, because I do believe that the church has put unnecessary fears and limits on things that shouldn't be feared. So with that in mind, I am exploring things that I believe are good, but I don't necessarily know, you know?
Yeah.
But I also don't believe that God created this infinite playground for us and then says, don't go here and you can go there.
Yeah.
So inside that framework, though, I pray to God all the time and ask that God just guide me on my path, and that no matter where I go, that his purpose for my life would be played out, and that I would only lay my feet on the path that he has laid out for me. And so with that in mind, I say explore and go out there, and it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to think one thing today and another thing tomorrow.
Right.
It's all about the journey, and just consult Spirit within, and I believe you'll be set on the right path.
Yeah. Agreed. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am always open to someone exploring. Sometimes curiosity kills the cat. So I truly do believe in leaning into your intuition. Like if something feels off, I mean, I've gotten myself into some dicey situations because I've been curious about things. in my old age, I'm starting to wise up a little bit of like, oh, that feels like that. Maybe I shouldn't go that path. There's things that are inherently darker, and there's things that are inherently lighter. And some of the dark things of this world can entice us because it's mysterious and, we don't know a whole lot about it. Just be careful, because there's just some things out there that if you open yourself up, just know you're opening yourself up to all types of stuff.
Yeah.
But I do believe that we are protected, we are loved, we are divinely created, and we always have help.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Like you said, always ask for just discernment.
Yep.
And follow that feeling inside of you.
Yes.
I mean, that's key.
100%.
Know the voice inside of you. And the only way you're going to know that voice is be still and know that I am God.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it, KK.
All right. Snap,
Freaking
snap.
great. Well, thank you guys for coming along the journey with us today. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Hopefully in the next podcast, we'll have another interview, but we're trying to secure a date and time for that. So we'll keep you posted, probably on our Instagram or something. So find us online, send us an email at therememberingpodcast@gmail.com. And we're on Instagram at The Remembering Podcast. And we'll be back in about 2 weeks.
All right.
So have a beautiful day. We'll talk to you guys later.